Hi guys, my name is Alex. I'm an architect in London, and in this video we'll look into how to become a registered architect in UK. So I became a registered architect about 2 years ago, and I remember at the beginning of my studies I was super confused about things like how much technical knowledge do I have to have? Do I need to have loads of site experience? What are the different components involved in the architectural examination? And I was just confused about where to even start this process. And all of these worries meant that I didn't have enough confidence in myself to believe that I can actually pass the architectural exam. And if any of that sounds even remotely like you, then stick around, because in this video I'm going to show you a roadmap of how to begin approaching your studies in an organized and efficient way. So before you even start, there are a couple of things to consider. First of all, and the most annoyingly, you have to fill up the PEDR sheets. And these are the sheets that you have to fill in every 3 months or every quarter to record your professional experience. And these sheets go through the type of experience that you have accumulated so far during your professional career. A couple more things to consider. First of all, you'll need to get a PSA, who is a professional studies advisor. And this is typically a person that's assigned to you by your university. There's a fee to pay for their services, but they will help you to fill the PDR sheets, or more like validate them, at the end of each of these periods of experience. And then lastly, you also have to get a mentor. And mentor is somebody at your workplace who is an architect with at least 5 years of experience, who will help you and guide you through this process of going through your experience and hopefully helping you to fill in any gaps that you might have. And then most importantly, it's about figuring out what kind of Part 3 education you'd like to receive. Now, I did my Part 3 in Scotland, and it was very much self-directed approach. We only, I remember, had 3 days of lectures, and the rest of it was pretty much up to us to figure out. And in London, for example, there's a completely different approach, where it's lecture-based learning and you have submission-based approach, and that's how you progress through your studies. So deciding on the factors like proximity and the type of education you'd like is really important in the beginning. So the second thing to consider is the experience, and experience is really everything when it comes to architecture, because schools of architecture simply don't prepare us enough for the real world. Now, a good thing about experience is that it is generally understood that nobody will ever have 100% coverage of all areas that architects need to know, which is totally fine. And it's more important sometimes to know where to look for the information rather than knowing everything in advance, because things change, contracts change, building regulations advance. There's all sorts of changes that are happening in profession. But nevertheless, what the examiners are going to be looking for is the competence across 5 different areas. The first one is the professionalism, and it is the kind of easiest one of all. It's to do with the ethics, and it's to do with the code of conduct. Can you be professional and reliable is the basic gist of it. The second one is a bit harder. It's about users and delivery. Now, this is more about making sure that you understand what the clients are, who they are, and what their brief is, in order to then propose your services. Understanding the brief is one of the most important things in architecture and cannot be overstated. So making sure that you have experience in that is going to be critical. The third part is the legal processes and frameworks. Now, this might be arguably one of the most boring areas of architectural examinations, but it's also one of the most critical ones. It talks about the law and your understanding of UK property and construction law. So because we're professionals that are part of the wider construction industry, it does make sense to understand who are the different stakeholders and what are their involvement in this process. And then point number 4 is about practice and management. It's about how to resource your staff, how to allocate fees, and how to charge for the project. Again, super important and vital part of the business of architecture, because if architectural business doesn't generate money, there is no architectural practice. That's as simple as that. And then lastly, number 5 is the building procurement, which is arguably one of the most important parts of experience to gain, because it's basically involves all the construction stages and pre-construction stages. So it's things like understanding different procurement systems, it's the contract understanding, how the site processes work, and it's also about litigation and the legal system as well. And these are basically the 5 areas that we're assessed against when we're taking our exam. So the exam itself consists of several components and submissions, and the first one is the case study. And the case study is basically a written work at the end of the part 2. It's about analyzing the project that you've been directly involved in, and it's looking at the things that were done well, the things that can be improved, and the things that should never be done. So it's really critical analysis of the entire process that went into that building during your involvement. And the second part of this is the written examination. A good source on that is David Chappelle's book, construction contracts, questions and answers. It's a really good source to train yourself to think in terms of answering questions that you're given at the exam. In Scotland, for example, it takes a whole day or two actually to fill them in and answer. It's about 10 questions. Other institutions are less demanding in terms of time, so it can be a couple of hours to rapid fire answer questions in front of the examiner. So different places do this differently. Then there's of course the PDR submission, which is the 8 sheets to demonstrate the 2 years minimum of the experience gained. This is just to give examiners an opportunity to assess the experience that you had against the 5 points previously covered in this video. And then there's also things like, CVs, which is basically to show what kind of schools you went to and what sort of experience you had. And on top of that, there might be a little assessment, a little personal brief overview of what your experience has been like. That's really institution dependent as well. And finally, there's the interview itself, which is an opportunity for the examiners to basically make sure that the person who wrote and submitted all the work is really you. And I think it's just an opportunity for them to see who you are and ask you any questions or clarifications, and to make sure that you have, necessary knowledge and that you haven't, I guess, cheated. And so with all that being said, there's quite a lot in this process. Really, there's numerous ways you can go about it. And I certainly was really confused when I was studying towards my part 3. I didn't really know where to start this whole thing. And I wish at that point I knew about the 80-20 principle and its practical potential application in this process. I really do think that 80% of results during the exam will be from 20% of learning. The type of learning that I would recommend you to do really boils down to a couple of things. I think making sure that you understand the procurement route. It's basically the process of acquiring goods, and it's how different individuals are positioned in the process. The second addition to that as well would be the appointment, which is a fancy term for a contract between an architect and the client. Really important. You cannot be an architect without an appointment working with the client. Then we also have the construction contract, which is another type of contract, but this time it's between the client and the contractor, which comes in later in the design process. So I think understanding the procurement, appointments, and the contracts are really a good start in this process. And I think finally it's also about understanding what the role of architect actually is and what it technically means, because it's quite easy to get bogged down by all these technicalities and forget about the bigger picture, which is that ARB, who are the Architect Registration Board, is the type of institution that puts architects on a little register that's available online for anyone to see, and their whole job is to make sure that the people that they put on the register are behaving according to the code of conduct. Code of conduct for architects should be like a Bible, so it's really important to kind of understand that, because ARB's job is not to care about architects, to be honest. It's about protecting the public. So that's why there's a code of conduct, in order to make sure that the public is protected against the negligent architects. It's as simple as that. Unfortunately, there is no licensing in this country. Architects don't get licensed. The profession is not protected. Anyone really who can draw can pretend that they're an architect, so the function is not protected. But what is protected is that professional integrity. That basically means that we as architects are held to a higher standard. And really what this exam boils down to is one single question: can this individual work on a small project with minimum supervision? If you like this video, you'll love this playlist that I created on part 3, which is basically a collection of different lectures and videos on YouTube that talk about part 3 examination. So check that playlist out, and I'll see you in the next video.